Hello everyone, good evening. Apologies guys, my Zoom app got updated a couple of minutes late. Can you guys hear me? One of you please confirm.
Yes.
Okay, I'll just wait for one more minute. And while we are waiting for others, let's get connected to the instances. I thought of showing OAuth authentication today before I proceed with the next application, but we'll do it this way, guys. We'll create a next integration today. And in Monday's session, I'm going to talk about OAuth. And I'm also going to show you a few other things as well. So if I do OAuth now, it will take around 15 minutes. And after that, we won't be able to complete the integration build. So I don't want to spread the integration build across two sessions. So we'll do the SOAP service build today, which is our next integration. And we'll do OAuth on Monday session. Okay, I'm getting into our project, UG63. And we've created our first REST API, and we are very clear on the steps that we need to do to build an integration today, right? We are going to build the next integration now. And in that integration, we're going to, that's going to be a SOAP service that we will build. And this SOAP service is going to do the same thing that our REST API does. Okay, so this SOAP service that we're going to build now would also do the exact same thing that a REST API did. It's going to take first name as input, prefix hello, and send it back as a response. Now, before you say, Prasad, I didn't enroll in a course to learn Hello World services, there are a couple of good reasons why I included this in a course content. First of all, I'm not going to spend more than 30 to 40 minutes in this particular integration. And the two reasons why we are doing this is, in this integration, I'm going to show you how to use something called as an abstract whistle in a trigger connection as a starting point. We will be building few more SOAP services down the line, guys. But in those integrations, we would be using concrete whistle URL as a starting point. Now, at this point, you don't know what is abstract whistle and concrete whistle, but by the time we are done with today's session, you would have very much clarity. And another reason why we have this in the course content is I want to exactly pinpoint the differences between the REST API build and a SOAP service build. And what's the easiest way to compare two things, guys? So we've already built a REST API achieving this, right? So if you build a SOAP service achieving the same thing, we can do a comparison, step-by-step comparison between the REST API build and a SOAP service build. Okay, everybody with me so far? Now you guys need to help me with this integration build. What should be my first step, guys? First of all, do I need to talk to any application as part of this service?
No.
No EBS, no ERP Cloud, no Salesforce, right?
No.
And do we need a trigger connection for this integration?
Yes.
Yes.
So, and what adapter are we going to use for this one? SOAP adapter.
Abstract SOAP, yeah, SOAP.
Now, why are we picking up SOAP adapter here? Because I want to expose my integration as a SOAP service. So the adapter that you use within a trigger connection is basically going to determine how your integration gets exposed as, whether it gets exposed as a SOAP service or as a REST API would be dependent on the trigger connection adapter. Okay, so that's why I'm picking up SOAP adapter. Let's give it a name. What do we call it, guys? Hello world, SOAP connection. And what should be the role? Trigger. Because I want to use this only to trigger the integration. Now, let's start comparing this. Okay, so I'm going to log into OIC instance from here as well. Now we go into projects. Now let me open up the REST connection. In a REST trigger connection, what did we enter guys here? First of all, what sections do you see here? You see security section, you see access type, right? But if you look at the SOAP connection, so you see security and you see access type. And you know very well what this security determines, right? So what does this determine, guys? This would determine in what format. This would determine the format in which you need to pass in the authentication credentials when you trigger the integration. Okay, so we use this as a trigger in REST API. And when we trigger the REST API, so the security policy that you've selected here would control in what format you pass in authentication details. So you have the same security stuff here, and you have same access type as well. Now, what is the default security policy for SOAP connection, guys? It is username password token. Okay, what was the default security policy for REST API? It was OAuth token, but we changed it to OAuth or basic auth. But in the case of SOAP connection, the default security policy would be username password token. We can change it to OAuth or basic auth if we want, but we're going to leave it as is. We're going to leave it as a username password token so that I can show you how the tokens work as well with the SOAP services. Can I go ahead and test it, guys? What is it saying? It says it has failed. The connection test has failed. And why did it fail, guys? Check your connection and the credential properties. So in addition to the security policy and the access type, we also need to enter the connection properties here. We also need to enter the connection properties. Remember, guys, in the case of a REST trigger connection, we don't enter anything in the connection. We don't enter anything in the connection. You can think of it as a generic connection that we are creating. And when we use this connection within the integration flow, when we use the connection within the integration flow, when we use the connection within the integration flow as a trigger, this is where you would be configuring what is it that you want to receive as a request and what is it that you want to send back as a response. Where did we mention first name as an input and greeting as a response, guys? We mentioned it when we use this connection as a trigger in the integration. Meaning, you don't enter the request or response payloads in the trigger connection. Instead, it is something that you enter within the integration. So since we don't enter any details in our REST trigger connection, guys, for the entire integration project that you're doing, even if you build 100 REST APIs, how many trigger connections you need for the project, guys?
Only one.
Only one, because you're not entering anything in the connection details. And I could have renamed this, guys. I have used other word, but just assume that you don't have this. Okay, just say UG30, UG63 REST connection. I can use this REST connection to start Hello World REST API. I can mention greeting as input. First name as input, greeting as response. I can also use the same connection to start AP invoice REST API. I can configure, I can use the same trigger connection in AP invoice REST API, and I can mention AP invoice details as input. And in the response, I can print the invoice ID and other details. And I can use the same connection to start purchase order REST API. And in that integration, I can mention purchase order details in the request payload and PO header ID in the response. So the key takeaway is REST trigger connection. It's a pretty generic connection. You don't enter any details in there. And when you use the connection within the integration, that is exactly where you're going to mention what is it that you need as input and what is it that you need as response for that particular integration. Everybody with me so far, guys? But it doesn't work that way in the case of a SOAP connection. So when you create a SOAP trigger connection, you need to enter either a WSDL URL or you need to upload an abstract WSDL file. Now I use two terms here, concrete WSDL URL or an abstract WSDL file. Now let me explain these two terms first. Now, when you create a, let me go into web service basics. I'll take a PLSQL analogy to explain this. So everybody is aware of PLSQL packages, right?
Yes.
Now, what do you normally do, guys, whenever you create a PL SQL package? You create a specification first, and in the specification, you're going to mention what are the procedures you want to implement, what are the procedures and functions you want to implement with the input and outputs you just mentioned in the specification, right? Whatever you want to implement, you would just mention that procedure name or the function names in a specification. And where do you put in logic into those procedures or functions, guys?
In the body.
You would do it in a PLSQL body. And in a PLSQL package, procedures are considered as logical units. Procedures are considered as logical units, right? So when we say invoke a PLSQL package, do you invoke package as a whole, guys, or do you invoke a specific procedure within it?
A specific procedure
A
or function.
specific procedure, right? Because this is
Procedure.
a logical unit. Say, for example, if you are doing a tax calculation package, in the specification, you would just say, tax calculation PRC, and you would have two input variables, amount and a tax rate, and there would be one out variable, which would be the tax amount. But do you plug in the calculation logic in the specification, guys? No, right? So in the body, this is where you're going to mention it. You say tax amount equal to amount into tax rate by 100. So the logic part would be, or the implementation part would be there in a package body, right? So that's exactly what we do in SOAP service as well. So in case of SOAP web service, you can create a specification for a SOAP web service. And that SOAP specification, a specification you create for a SOAP service, would be called as abstract WSDL. And this abstract WSDL would be in the form of a file. Meaning, I'll just open up a file, save it as a .WSDL extension. And in that file, what would be the content you get to see, guys? So in this file, what are the normal things that you see in a SOAP service? In a WSDL, what are the things that we normally see, guys? We have custom data types, right? And those custom data types are assigned to messages. And those messages are attached to the input and output of the operations. Did we see all of this, guys, in the SOAP service basic session? And
Yes.
there is one additional thing that we have also seen, which is the endpoint details, right? Which is the endpoint details as well. So these are the four things that you would normally have in a concrete WSDL URL. So these are the four things that you would normally have. And what are the details that we have in an abstract WSDL file, guys? In an abstract WSDL file, you would only have three of them. What is it that you would have? You would have data types defined, and those data types are used to define messages, and those messages are attached to the operation. Input and output operations. And these are the details that you would have in an abstract WSDL file, meaning it is just a specification wherein I just mentioned what operations I want to implement. And for those operations, you have input the operations would have input and output. And to the input and output, you have messages attached, and to the messages, you have data types attached, right? So that's exactly how this abstract WSDL is created. So if you see this abstract WSDL, first of all, you see the port type element. Under a port type element, I have deliberately put in two operations. Both operations are basically the same, but I've just put in two operations with a 2 at the end on the second operation, because I just want to show you how multiple operations are going to show up in a SOAP trigger connection. And under a port type, you have two operations here. And for each operation, you have input and output. And to the input and output, you see there is a message attached. There's a request message and there is a response message attached. And you see this message, guys, request message is defined here. And to the request message, there is a data type attached, which is a greet request data type. And in the greet request data type, what is it that you see, guys? There's only one attribute in the request data type called first name, which is of data type string. And you have a data type called response defined, where you have only one attribute called greeting of data type string. So if you want to receive two inputs, what is it that you're going to do, guys? You would just repeat this like that. Okay, you can have, so in the request data type, you can mention whatever you want to receive as input. How many attributes you want to receive, right? And the input, you can mention all of them here, and you can assign a data type for them. And in the response also, you mention what is it that you want to send back. And after the data types are defined, those data types are used to define messages, and those messages are attached to the operations. But do we have endpoint details here, guys? Do we have endpoint details? No. So what is it that I mentioned here? I just mentioned. So I just wrote a specification for my SOAP service here, wherein I said I want to implement 2 operations. Just think of only one. This is just a duplication of it to show you how multiple operations show up in the dropdown. I just want to implement greeting operation, which should take in first name as input, and it should give you back greeting in the response. That's my intention. But do you see a logic of prefixing hello to the first name and assigning it to the greeting here, guys? Do you see that logic anywhere? No, right? And that would come in the implementation part. So whenever you build a SOAP service, you can start off, but remember I use words very, very carefully, guys. So I'm saying I can start off a SOAP web service with an abstract WSDL file, which means there are other ways also to start a SOAP service, which is concrete WSDL URL. So in a SOAP trigger connection, you can use either a concrete WSDL URL or you can upload an abstract WSDL file. Okay, so only in this integration, I'm going to show you how to use an abstract WSDL file as a starting point. In the integrations that we're going to build down the line, journal import service or outbound service, we would be using concrete WSDL URL in the trigger connection. And one important point, guys, if you build 100 SOAP services, at least in 95 of them, you would be using concrete WSDL URL in the trigger. And maybe in 4 to 5 integrations, you might use an abstract WSDL file. So if your next question is, Prasad, what are those 95 scenarios and what are those 5 scenarios where we use abstract WSDL? I'm not going to answer that question now. When we build the journal import SOAP service, I would be talking more about that. Okay, for now, just bear in mind that in a SOAP trigger connection, you could use a WSDL URL or a WSDL file, abstract WSDL file or a concrete WSDL URL. And also remember that using concrete WSDL URL is something that we do very common and it is considered as a best practice. Wherever feasible, we use concrete WSDL URLs in the trigger connection, the standard concrete WSDLs given by Oracle, and it is considered as a best practice. Why is that so? We'll discuss it in journal import service. Now I want to upload this abstract WSDL file. Do you see that WSDL, guys? Yeah, open that. Now, after you upload an abstract WSDL file, remember, I'm going to leave the security policy as is, username, password token. I'm going to test the connection. I can do a test or validate and test. Both are fine. And you save the connection. Refresh it. So this is in log state because this connection is open here. Since this connection is open, the rest connection is in log state. So you see this connection is in configured state now. The hello world. SOAP connection. It's not showing the complete name. Yeah, hello world SOAP connection. It is in configured state. And the rest connection, the moment I close it, you should be able to see the log released. Yeah, since I changed the authentication, the status got changed back to graph. That's fine. So we have the SOAP connection in a configured state. Now we need to go ahead and create an integration, app-driven orchestration. And this is pretty straightforward, guys. So what is it that we are going to call it as? UG63 Hello World SOAP service. And we would use Hello World SOAP connection as a trigger. And I want to call it as say hello because all this endpoint is also going to do is prefix hello to the first name, right? So I'm just giving it a meaningful name. Now, when you use a SOAP trigger connection, when you use a SOAP trigger connection, what would happen, guys? OIC would go into that SOAP connection, and whether you plug in whatever is plugged in the properties, whether it is a concrete WSDL URL or whether it is an abstract WSDL file. So whatever is mentioned here, whether it is a URL or a WSDL file, that URL or a WSDL file will be scanned by OIC, and whatever operations you have in that WSDL, whether it is a URL or a file, those operations will be showing up in the dropdown. Remember, guys, I uploaded a WSDL file, right? How many operations are there in this file, guys? How many operations do you see?
2 are there.
2 operations, right? So you see greeting and greeting too. So that's why you see these 2 operations here. And I'm going to pick up one operation called greeting here, the first one. And this operation that you select in a trigger connection. Remember, to an operation, what is it that you have, guys? You have a message attached, request message attached to input, response message attached to output. So the moment I select an operation, this is going to get defaulted as a request payload for the service, and the response or the output message is going to be the response of your integration. So the operation that I pick up in a SOAP trigger connection would determine what is going to be the input payload for my integration and what is going to be the response payload. What is going to be my request and what is going to be my response for a SOAP service would be dependent on the operation that you select here. I selected greeting operation here, guys. Right? I selected greeting operation here. Now, what is going to be the input for my service, guys? Greet request message. And in the greet request message, you have greet request data type. And in the greet request data type, you have first name. So first name is going to be the input for my service. And what is going to be the response of my service, guys? Greeting. Okay, so the operation that you select in a SOAP trigger connection would control what is going to be the request payload and the response payload. Now, what it also means is, since you mention a WSDL in the SOAP trigger connection, whether it is a URL or a file doesn't matter. Only the operations that are available in that SOAP service would be available in the dropdown. So which means, can I use this connection to start a journal import SOAP service, guys? Can I use this connection to trigger a journal import SOAP service? No, right? Because we only have greeting related operations here. So I cannot take in first name and import a journal in ERP, right? So SOAP trigger connection is going to be specific for the integration. So if I create a Hello World SOAP connection, guys, I can only use this for Hello World services. I cannot use it for journal or any other case, unlike a REST API. Okay, so I'm going to click on continue. And since I picked up an operation which has a request and a response, what's going to happen when I click on finish, guys? So you see that there is a response element added automatically, and you also see a mapper created. And what do you do in the mapper, guys? Mapper is pretty straightforward, right? So you have greeting on the target and you have first name on the source. What is it that I have to do? I just have to map it, and I come in here and I can add a concat function, concat hello to the first name, and I'm going to save it. Validate. So I'm just prefixing hello to the first name, assigning it to the greeting. Pretty straightforward. And we already discussed the mapping options in our previous integration. We will not get into it again. And we need to enable tracking, right? Only then the integration status would change from draft to configured. And I've enabled first name as tracking identifier. Now we just have to activate the integration. I'm going to select debug as a tracing level, and we also discussed this in detail yesterday. I'm going to activate it. Now, one important point, guys, if it is a REST API, we have an option to test it we have an option to run it from a OIC instance. So when I say run, what would happen? It gives me an option to test the integration within OIC instance. This would be the case with REST APIs. Do we see that option with SOAP services, guys? Let's see. It just says run details. It is not saying run, it just says run details, and it is going to show you only the WSDL URL. So which means I cannot test the SOAP services from within OIC instance. So there is a WSDL URL generated. I just have to make use of this WSDL URL. And I can test the SOAP service by using a testing tool like SOAP UI. Now, what is this WSDL URL called as, guys? This is what we call as a concrete WSDL URL. So what is it that we did in the last 10 minutes, guys? We have used abstract WSDL file as a starting point, and we have implemented it in OIC. How did we implement it, guys? By building an integration in OIC, using that SOAP connection as a trigger, and we did the required transformation, and we were sending it back. And after we built the integration, when we activated it, there is a concrete WSDL URL generated. Okay. Now, in the concrete WSDL URL, so in the last 5 minutes, we have seen how to, 5-10 minutes, we have seen how to convert a concrete WSDL, sorry, abstract WSDL into a concrete WSDL. Now, on this concrete WSDL URL, what is it that you get to see, guys? You would be able to see, what is it that you see, guys? Do you see the data types?
Yes.
Yes, we see them. Do you see the messages? Yes, we see them.
Yes.
Do you see the operation? Yes, we see it. But what is that additional thing that you're seeing here in a concrete WSDL URL, which you don't see in abstract WSDL file, guys? In abstract WSDL file also, we have all three, right? We have data types, messages, and port type. Under port type, you see operations. But what is one additional thing that you see here? The service details. The service details. In case of a concrete WSDL URL, you have the service details here. So a concrete WSDL URL is something that you can call. Okay, so we can trigger integration using this WSDL URL. And when we call this WSDL URL, who is going to answer that call, guys? UG63 Hello World SOAP service built and deployed in this OIC instance is going to respond to those requests, guys. Okay. Now I'm going to call this WSDL. I'm going to add it as a SOAP project. We don't need to create a separate project, guys. We can just go ahead and add it to UG63 folder that I created earlier. And what SOAP UI is going to do, guys? It would create a sample request payload. Now, what is it prompting me to pass in, guys?
First name.
And where did this first name come from? Where is it coming from? It is coming from the
WS.
Yeah, WSDL request data type. And what authorization details do I need to pass in, guys? Do I have to pass in OIC credentials or ERP credentials here?
Oh,
Why OIC credentials, guys?
because you're routing.
Yeah, because we are not calling any standard SOAP service given by Oracle. We are trying to trigger our integration, which is built and deployed in the OIC instance. So I'm entering the username password token. And how am I passing the authentication details here, guys? As a basic auth. As a basic auth. Is this going to work, guys, if I hit the send button? Anybody thinks otherwise? We're not getting
token, right?
Absolutely. Yes. So we're not seeing any response here, but if you click on draw, it's going to tell you what the problem is. What does it say, guys? Unauthorized. Why is it saying unauthorized? Even though we are passing basic auth here, this is not matching. Or when you trigger an integration, what determines the login credentials format, guys?
Connection.
Connections trigger policy, right? So in
Yes.
this integration, what is the trigger connection I used? SOAP trigger connection. And I go to the SOAP connection. Let me go in. Go to the trigger connection. And what is the security policy that we have in SOAP trigger, guys? I think it's already open here. Username password token. Had it been basic auth, if I've probably changed it to basic auth, this would have worked. But I have left the security policy as is, right? I've left it as username password tokens, which means I cannot pass in username and password as a basic auth. Instead, I need to generate a token with this username and password, and I need to pass it in the header. So I need to go into how do you generate a username password token, guys? So you go into a header and you do a right click and say add WSS username token. Remember what is SOAP header section used for, guys? It is used to pass in additional authentication tokens whenever required, right? So you go into SOAP header, do a right click and you say add WSS username token. And I'm going to add the password as a text. You can add password as a text or you can hash it if you want when you generate a token, and you click on OK. Now what would happen with this username and password? A token gets generated and that token is included in a SOAP header section. Now that we have included username password token in the request for this particular integration, would it go through, guys? Let's see if it goes through. Could see that you've got back a response now, which means, yes, since the security policy that you have mentioned in a trigger is matching with what you're passing in a request payload, we have got back a response, and in the response, we see greeting, hello, these. Okay. Now, if we go back into the observability section, integrations, we should be able to see that there are two requests received for SOAP service. One of them errored out. Why, guys? Invalid format for security. And we see the second one went through successfully. And we are able to see the integration instance here. And the story is same, right? You know it very well. I just triggered hello prefixed to the first name and it has been sent back. Okay. So we have seen how to achieve this particular the hello world service as a REST yesterday, and we have seen how to do it as a SOAP service. But in this SOAP service, what is it that we have seen, guys? We have used abstract WSDL file as a starting point in the integration. Remember, guys, we're going to build quite a few SOAP services down the line. But in those SOAP services, we will be using abstract WSDL file. Sorry, we won't use abstract WSDL file as a starting point. Instead, we use a concrete WSDL URL. Why is that the case? I would be explaining when we do the journal import service. And another important point is, just in case anybody is wondering, Prasad, how do I create this abstract WSDL file? How do I create this abstract WSDL file? First of all, you don't have to worry too much about it, guys, because you might probably use it in 2 or 3 or maximum 5 services out of 100. And how do you build it? How can you build an abstract WSDL file? You have online editors available. If you go to Google and type in generate abstract WSDL file, you have online editors available which can help you generate it. Or if you want, you can also make use of JDeveloper to create this abstract WSDL file. So in the PPT, I've given a link in one of the slides, guys. If you go to slide number 4, I've put in a URL there, and this URL contains steps which would help you to create an abstract WSDL file. It's quite an old blog, but it still works. So you just have to open up your JDeveloper, create a new application. Just follow the instructions given here. Create a new application. Create a schema first. And in the schema, you're going to mention, you would mention what is it that you want to receive as input and what is it that you want to send back as an output. Okay. And after that, you create an abstract WSDL document. And in that abstract WSDL document, you're going to attach the, remember, you see the port types, guys, whatever you have seen there. You would attach the operation there, and you would attach to that operation, you attach messages, and to the messages, you have a data types attached. So if you scroll down, you would be able to see it looks like this. Okay, employee detail operation, it's going to take employee ID as input. It's going to give you back an employee name in the response. So this way, if you use JDeveloper, you can create abstract WSDL files that you need. When you build a SOAP service, you don't need to create one, guys, using JDeveloper. Instead, you can make use of this abstract WSDL file given in the material folder. Or else, what else you can do, guys? Another easiest thing to do is you just get into my SOAP connection. You just get into my SOAP connection, and you can download that WSDL file from there. Okay. Now, 2 or 3 important points I want to talk about, guys. Why is it taking that long? So when we activated this integration, let's go to the integration first. If we go to the integrations, I'll ask you a few questions now, guys. So we've created these 2 integrations, right? And when I activated the integrations, remember when I activated a REST API, what has happened, guys? Integration has generated, OIC has generated a REST endpoint URL.
Endpoints.
Okay, OIC has generated a REST endpoint URL. And when I activated this, the integration that we created today, okay, the SOAP service, what did OIC do, guys? When I activated it, it has created a concrete WSDL URL. It has created a WSDL URL. Now tell me one thing, guys. Who told OIC that I'm trying to build a REST API here and a SOAP service, guys? Did it look at the name to decide that?
No,
Even
while
if you
listen-
don't, yeah, even if you don't have REST API or SOAP service in the names, guys, when you activate them, you would still see the same behavior. Now, what I'm wondering is, how does OIC know that I'm building a REST API here and a SOAP service here, guys? Think about it and answer.
when we are creating connection, it is we have given the option adapter.
Adapter, absolutely. So the integrations, trigger connections, adapter is going to determine how your integration gets exposed as. Since I used a trigger connection with a REST adapter, this integration got exposed as a REST API. Since I used a SOAP trigger connection in the integration, since I used a trigger connection with a SOAP adapter in the integration got exposed as a SOAP service. So the trigger connection adapter is going to determine whether your integration gets exposed as SOAP or REST. Now, what else does a trigger connection determines, guys, apart from how the integration gets exposed as?
Security.
It's also going to control the security part. So in what format we pass in login credentials to access the integration, to access the service? Remember, when I tried this service, I passed in basic auth, it didn't work because it was username password token that I selected there. And after I generated a token and included it in the request, in the security header section, it worked. So the security policy of a trigger connection is going to determine how you pass in authentication details when you trigger the integration, guys. When you trigger the integration. Okay. Now, what else does a trigger connection determine, guys? What is the third thing that it's going to determine? It's going to determine the request and the response payloads for your integration, guys. So in this particular integration, when I triggered it, I was prompted to pass in first name and I've got back greeting. Where is this these two coming in from, guys? First name and greeting. We selected an operation in the trigger connection, and that operation is going to determine what is going to be the request payload and what would be the response payload. And in the case of REST API also, it is no different, guys. Here we don't select operation, but we mention it explicitly in the trigger connection itself. You mention the first name as input and a greeting as a response. So trigger connection is also going to determine what is going to be the request payload for your service, and what is going to be the response payload. So these are the three things that a trigger connection determines. Any questions so far, guys, from anyone? Okay, I'll take it as no. Let's start, do one thing, guys. I want to show you, now that we have some time, I want to show you how to use a JavaScript library in an integration. Okay, let me just make a clone of this integration, guys. I'll just clone the REST API. I'm going to clone it. And I would call it as invoke JavaScript. And in this integration, remember guys, when you create an integration, in the integration mapper, we would be able to see the list of functions here and the operators. And if you enable XSLT, you would also be able to see the advanced XSLT functions. Remember guys, these advanced XSLT functions plus 100 plus functions which are available here would be more than sufficient for you to do the required transformations in your integration. Okay, whether it is concatenating string, whether it is formatting a date, whether it is any other date or conversion or integration related functions, all of them are available here out of the box. And these functions, normal functions plus advanced XSLT functions, would help you to achieve your requirement. But for a moment, let's assume that we don't have this concat function. For a moment, let's assume that under string category, we don't have concat function. We do have it, and we do have plenty of other string functions as well. But just for the sake of understanding how JavaScript library works, let's assume that we don't have this. Okay, so what is it that we need to do, guys? As part of this integration use case, I'm receiving first name. I need to prefix hello to that first name, assign it to greeting. Let's see how to do it, guys, with the help of a JavaScript library. So what I need to do is I need to go ahead and I need to search for, I would go to Google and search for a JavaScript function. I would go ahead and search for a JavaScript function. I would search for a JavaScript function which would help me concatenate two strings. Okay, because I need a JavaScript function which would help me concatenate two strings. So what is it that we do, guys? What we would be doing is we would be creating a JavaScript file. We would be creating a JavaScript file which is going to look something like this. Or let me download it from here, guys. I can go into the project here. I'm going to go into another project and I would just download the JavaScript library file. So I'm going to just download this concat JavaScript file. I think there was underscore after the batch name and I missed that. So what is it that you're going to do, guys? You would write a JavaScript file. Which is going to look something like this. I'm going to call this as UG63 JavaScript file, concat.js. And within a JavaScript file, you can have any number of functions here, guys. you can have any number of JavaScript functions within a single JavaScript file. And this is a syntax of a JavaScript, guys. So you would mention a function name, function keyword, function name, and you mention what are the operators that you want to pass as input. Two input parameters, parameter 1 and 2. And what is it that I'm doing in the function, guys? Plain and simple. I'm just concatenating a space in between the two parameters. I'm just putting space in between two parameters, and I'm assigning it to a return message. I'm putting a space in between the parameter 1 and 2 and concatenating them, and I'm assigning it to a return message variable, and I'm sending it back. So whatever JavaScript function that you need to do the transformation, whether it is just concatenating two strings or whether it is any complex date transformation or any other transformation you want to do, you would just search for you would just search for that particular JavaScript function, and you would put it in a JavaScript file. And what is it that you're going to do, guys? You would go to a project, and we need to import that JavaScript library first. So you go to JavaScript library, and you would import that JavaScript library. Give it a name. I'm saying UG63 concat.js, and I'm importing that JS file. And how many functions do we have in that JS file as JavaScript file? That's only one function, right? But if you have multiple functions, you would see all of them here. So I'll just select that. And you see two parameters of data type string, and there is also our output message of data type string again. So I'm going to save this. Now, what is it that I need to do? I can just call that REST API. I can just come in here and I can call that REST API from the mapper. There are two ways I can call this JavaScript function, guys. There are two ways I can call this JavaScript function in my integration. One obvious way is I can go into the functions tab here, and we see that there is an option to call a JavaScript library from here, JavaScript function. I can drag and drop it in front of the mapper, and I can mention which function I want to call. And you see that JavaScript function that we have configured. And I need to pass in two parameters as input. Remember, UG63 concat message would take in two parameters as input. So what is it that we want to pass in as input, guys?
First name.
I want to pass in a parameter 1 as hello. And what should be the second parameter? First name. And what is this JavaScript function going to do? It's going to concatenate these two parameters. It's going to concatenate these two. And it's going to give me back a return message. And this return message is going to be hello space, the first name, right? And I'm going to save this. And in the mapper, what is it that I want to do? Whatever is the response, remember, I'm not concatenating hello in my integration ways. I'm just calling a JavaScript function, and that JavaScript function, to that JavaScript function, I was passing hello and this first name as input to this. And this JavaScript function is giving me a return message, and this return message is nothing but the greeting. It is hello space the first name, and that is what I'm assigning back to the greeting here. I'm going to validate it. Save. And I can go ahead and activate the integration. Now it says the REST connection is in graph status. I would go ahead and test the REST connection. Activate it. And the moment you activate an integration, you see that the integration is in active status now. And in this integration also, I'm prefixing hello to the first name, but not within the integration. How am I prefixing hello guys to the first name in the integration? I'm doing it with the help of a JavaScript function. And I'm going to just run it. And when I run it, yes, I'm going to pass and say Sachin as input. I've got back hello Sachin as a response. But who prefixes hello guys to the first name? It is not the standard concat function given by Oracle, but it is a JavaScript function that we have included or we have imported into the integration project. And there is another way you can invoke a JavaScript function, guys. There is a second way to invoke a JavaScript function. Let me show you that as well. I'm going to clone the integration again. And I would say invoke JavaScript 2. Just want to show you another way to invoke a JavaScript function. And how do you do it, guys, this time? This time, I would not use the standard concat function given by Oracle. I would not use it. Instead, if you go into the functions tab, along with the normal functions, remember guys, before we imported the JavaScript function, we didn't see the user defined at all. So for this user defined to show up in the list here, guys, you need to have at least one JavaScript function defined. Now that we have one JavaScript function defined, under user defined, whatever JavaScript functions you have defined, you would be able to see those functions here. And I just have to drag and drop it. So I can invoke a JavaScript library for functions directly from within the mapper, guys. So this is a new way of doing it. In the old versions of OIC, we used to call the JavaScript function first, and then we used to read the response of it. But now in the recent versions of OIC instance, we don't have to do it as a two-step process. Instead, we can use the JavaScript library within the mapper itself. And what do we pass as a second name, as a second parameter, guys? The first name. So how am I concatenating hello to the first name now? Not making use of standard concat function, but with a custom JavaScript library. So this way, you can invoke a JavaScript library within the integration mapper. And this would help you. When exactly this would help you, guys? This would help you when you have to do some transformations for which a function is not available in the mapper, within the mapper. Everybody clear, guys, with these two options?
Yes.
Okay. I'll stop here for today. In Monday's session, we will discuss OAuth, and we will also see how to invoke one integration from another. I'll show you how to invoke a SOAP service from REST API. We'll see how to do it first, and then I'll talk about where all scenarios would that be helpful. And then we'll get started with a file transfer service. Okay. Yeah. Any questions, guys? Okay. Nice weekend, guys. See you on Monday.
Sure.